Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for hanging out with us while we settle some technical issues. So yes, thank you for joining us today for our inaugural data to decisions session, data by geographical areas. We are coming to you today from Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm Mandy Rousel. I work here at the Harris Center, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to RAnLab's first presentation on how to access and use data in your everyday roles. So just to let you know, today's session is being recorded and it will be available later on our website and on our YouTube channel. But before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, the Innu, and the Inuit of this province. So we encourage everyone to reflect on these lands and the lands where you're located today, and to consider the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. So the Regional Analytics Lab, or RAnLab for short, as we call it, is the data and analytics unit of Memorial University's Harris Center. RAnLab analyzes data and geography to provide insight into and projection modeling for things like demographics, labor supply, service demands, commodity prices, and other socioeconomic indicators. Some examples of their work includes producing long-term regional population projections, assessing local housing demand, and providing detailed local data and analysis to municipalities and regions. So providing critical information for evidence-based decision-making. We'd like to thank our sponsor for the series, the Future Skills Center. The center is a federally funded initiative that is committed to having all Canadians, from employees to employers, understand and assess what skills will be needed in the future labor market. And we can't think of anything that's more representative of future than data integration into everything we do. Data collection and availability have been hallmarks of the technological advances of the past few decades. And a large portion of decision-making today is based on evidence-based practice. It just has to be. Data has never before been collected in such quantities, nor has it existed so universally. Data can help inform your organizational decisions. It can strengthen grant applications, guide hiring practices, and undertake strategic planning. But jumping in and making sense of it isn't always easy. This series hopes to make that a little simpler. So to get us started, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Megan Eibner, a policy analyst with RAnLab. We're going to follow Megan's presentation with a 15-minute Q&A session with Jamie Ward, the manager of RAnLab. So throughout the presentation, we do ask that you send us your questions using the Q&A or chat functions, and we'll try to get to them after our presentation. So over to you, Megan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Megan Eibner, Policy Analyst with the Harris Center, and today I'm going to go over some basic concepts around data and geography. Now, I'm going to admit this isn't the most exciting topic, but it's important to have some knowledge on the relationship between data and geography. And this is because every data point is associated with some spatial definition. You cannot separate data and geography. They go hand in hand. So understanding this relationship is key for effective data analysis. Well-defined geographic areas provide a framework for the collection and analysis of data, and that's what we're going to be walking through today. Statistics Canada has developed a geographic hierarchy of data that we'll be using as our guide today. So here it is here. This is the breakdown of the geographic hierarchy developed and used by Statistics Canada. And at first glance, this looks kind of overwhelming, but we're going to break it down into smaller, more easily digestible pieces in this presentation. I'll explain what each of these areas are, give some examples, and also talk about the type of data available at each level. So to begin, this chart can roughly be split down the middle into two sides, an administrative side and a functional side. The geographic areas on the administrative side of the chart have boundaries designated either by law or through agreements between provinces and territories and Statistics Canada. Administrative geographic areas tend to be very stable because their boundaries are determined by law. The geographic areas on the functional side of the chart have boundaries determined by population and density measures. So these geographic areas are a little bit more dynamic and can change over time as populations change and grow and shrink. The data on the administrative side of the chart tends to be pretty standard census data, whereas the functional side of the chart, while it still includes census data, it can also include more distinct detailed data. It's on this side of the chart where you may find more specific targeted data sets that aren't necessarily available for all geographic areas. So that's just a bit of a distinction between the types of data on either side of the chart. Now, before we dive into the details of this chart, I just wanted to talk really quickly about this section here on population centers and rural areas. Practically speaking, these geographic areas aren't very commonly used for data collection, but they can provide some useful and interesting context for your analysis. So the thing that makes this section of the hierarchy chart interesting is that taken together, all population centers and rural areas cover the entirety of Canada. So every inch of Canada is defined as one of these 4 geographic areas. So just knowing the geographic makeup of the area you're studying in terms of population centers and rural area can be really useful information for your analysis. So I just wanted to mention that quickly before we get into the bulk of the chart. So here we go. We'll start up at the top with Canada. We all know Canada as a country as one spatial definition. And Canada is broken down into 6 geographic regions. Some regions, like the Atlantic region or the territories, are made up of more than one province or territory. But other larger, more populous provinces, like Quebec and BC, are geographic regions on their own. And of course, Canada is also broken out into provinces and territories. And from there, we move into economic regions. And economic regions are groupings of census divisions, which I will talk about in just a second. They are a standard geographic unit for analyzing regional economic activity. And most provinces and territories are broken out into several economic regions. So for example, BC has 8 economic regions, but not all provinces and territories are like this. PEI and the 3 territories, for example, are each just one economic region unto themselves. So some examples of economic regions would be Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, Red Deer, Alberta, Vancouver Island, and the coast in BC. So these higher levels of geography are where you'd find data for macro level analysis, things like provincial or national comparisons, for example. Here is where you'd find that high level data like population and demographic data, economic accounts data like GDP, migration, import-export data. All of that information can be found at these high levels of geography. So now we start to get into some of the smaller geographic areas. Economic regions, as I mentioned, are made up of census divisions. A census division is a group of municipalities joined together for the purposes of regional planning and managing common services, for example, police or ambulance services. And census divisions are established in provincial and territorial legislation. There are some provinces and territories like Newfoundland and Labrador, Alberta, and Nunavut that don't have these geographic areas established by law. And in these cases, Statistics Canada has entered into agreements with those provinces and territories to establish census division equivalents. So some examples of census divisions would be Baffin, Prince County, Greater Victoria. And next to provinces and territories, census divisions are the most stable geographic areas. So because of this stability, census divisions can be a good level of geography to use for long-term data collection and analysis. Below the census division level are census subdivisions, and these are municipalities or areas treated as municipal equivalents for statistical purposes. And some examples here would be Campbell's Bay, Quebec, Lockwood, Saskatchewan, Dawson, Yukon. And census divisions and census subdivisions are where you start to get into some detailed census data like education, training, language, income, all this data is also broken down by age and sex. So you can start to get into more detailed demographic analysis within a single geographic area or comparative analysis between two or more areas using this data. And I just wanted to mention here that it's important to note that a lot of this baseline census data, it can be found at all levels of geography, but the smaller and more detailed the geographic area gets, the less data will be available due to confidentiality measures. So that's just something to keep in mind as we move through this hierarchy chart and as you go off and search for data through these various levels of geography. So now we're going to move over to the functional side of the chart where we get into geographic areas defined by population. So we'll start off with Census Metropolitan Areas, or CMAs. And these are one or more adjacent municipalities centered on a population center called the core. And a CMA must have a population of at least 100,000, of which 50,000 or more must live in the core. The three biggest CMAs in Canada are Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. But of course, there are a lot of smaller CMAs as well, such as Guelph, Halifax, and Winnipeg. This CMA level is the lowest geographic level for which the labor force survey data is available. And data from this survey includes labor market activities such as employment status, employment by industry and occupation, part-time and full-time employment, hours worked, reason for unemployment. The list goes on and on. This survey is a really great data source, so it's useful to know at what geographic level this data is available. Under CMAs, we have census agglomerations, or CAs, which are one or more adjacent municipalities centered on a core. And a census agglomeration must have a core population of at least 10,000. So some examples of CAs are Whitehorse, Charlottetown, Yellowknife. And it's at this census agglomeration level where you can access municipal level data on, say, for example, the labor market or the housing market, which can be useful for municipal planning purposes. Next, we move into census tracts, which are small geographic areas with a population of less than 10,000 people, and they are located within CMAs and CAs. And census tracts are where you start to get into sub-municipal data, and in particular, you can find a good amount of income data at this level, specifically low-income data and data on family characteristics. And now we get into the smallest geographic areas for which data is available, the lowest tier of the hierarchy chart here, and this is where we get into dissemination blocks and areas. So these are areas bounded by roads or boundaries of standard geographic areas, and they have an average population of less than 700 people. So these, the dissemination area and dissemination block, are the smallest geographic areas for which population, dwelling, and census data are disseminated. The aggregate dissemination area is actually a new geography created for the 2016 census. These areas have a population of between 5,000 and 15,000 people, and they are created from existing dissemination areas. So it's at these levels of geography where you get into data at the neighborhood level. So an example of when this level of data could be useful could be when deciding, for example, the optimal location for a new business. So let's say you want to open a new daycare center. Population data down at a dissemination area level could help you identify the best neighborhood for your business given the demographics of that local area. So we come back around again to this big, maybe overwhelming chart again, except hopefully this time it doesn't seem as daunting as it did at the beginning of this presentation. Hopefully now, when you start your data search, you'll recognize the various geographic levels at which data may be available, and this is a big step towards properly collecting and analyzing data. So what's next for data? Some exciting stuff. Stats Canada is going to be releasing the 2021 census. Just last week, they released some updated information on their standard geographic areas. And starting in February, we're going to actually start to see some data, starting with population data. So I encourage you to keep up to date on what's coming out of Stats Canada and check out the new data as it's being released throughout next year. So some of the key takeaways from this presentation, to start, understanding the relationship between data and geography allows for more informed analysis, which can lead to really powerful evidence-based decision-making and storytelling from a national level to the local level and everywhere in between. But because of the immense amount of data available, focusing on one box or section of the hierarchy chart is going to help provide clarity and help provide a starting point for data collection. And following that point, choosing the appropriate geographic area for your research really depends on your specific data and analysis needs. It may be tempting to just go straight for data at the lowest, most detailed geographic level, but remember that the smaller the geographic level, the less data will be available. And finally, I just wanted to end this by saying that the topic of data and geography is complex, and choosing the best geographic area for your data needs can be really tricky. So Jamie and I at RAnLab, we are always available to help if you're struggling to figure out, the geographic context for your problem, or you're having trouble finding the data you need. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We can help. Our contact information is included here. So that concludes this presentation on data and geography, and now we'll have some time for questions and answers. Thanks.
So hi, everyone. We have a couple minutes now to answer some questions. I'm here with Jamie Ward, the RAnLab manager. So we do have a couple questions coming in. The first is, Jamie, do aggregated dissemination areas exclude populated areas of less than 5,000? For example, small towns, rural communities.
Oh, thank you, Megan. Well, the first thing I'm going to say to that is that Statistics Canada has a fantastic geography dictionary on their website. And so for any of these sort of technical type questions about whether something will qualify or not, sometimes it's great to just jump on there and just sort of read through it, or even better, to look for the data and just to download it and to see what's available. With that, I'm not totally certain. That's not a geography I use very often, so I'm not 100% certain on how it fits the criteria. But I believe it would exclude it. I'm not 100% certain, but I think that it is tied into the census tract definition. And if census tracts aren't available, then the CSD has to have a larger population. I think 15,000 people or more. So
okay, hopefully that answered your question. And the next one is it fair to say that economic regions are determined only by population?
Again, I'm not 100% certain on that one. I would say check the reference document stuff there, or materials.
So one thing I will mention is that when it comes to a lot of the details around the definitions of some of these geographic areas, we have included in our data and geography document, which will be made available to you guys, links to all of the specific StatsCan resources, their glossary definitions, and all of their very detailed information on data and geography. So you'll definitely be able to find a lot more detailed answers to some of these questions there. Okay, there's a question here. What capacity does NL Statistics Agency have in relation to local data that might be more difficult to achieve through StatsCan? Are there databases or data sets publicly available?
Yeah, thanks for that. There's a great distinction there. It's a great resource. They have, in particular, I'm sure this is different than other provinces, I know it is, but in Newfoundland and Labrador, this Newfoundland Statistics Agency has some really great resources for different types of data. They have the community accounts portal, which has sort of a different take on some different geographies and has the ability to download tables and to display things visually. There's also an open data portal that the government maintains, similar to the federal government open data portal. One of the big differences I find that's useful that you find there between both of them are you can get a lot of vital statistics data. Sometimes, it'll be a little bit different than what you can get from Statistics Canada. So, that has, traditionally been the place to go to get birth and death data if you were constructing a population model. Yeah, so it's just great to check out. Those are the two main resources. I know you can go to the Statistics Agency website and they have, loads of widgets and different things on there as well.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. The next question is, could big data start to eclipse survey-based data? What impact will big data have on gathering information on smaller communities, which may lag in data collecting infrastructure?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think this is something that the powers that be are working through at the moment. I think one of the best things about where we are right now is we can sort of work them together, right? They can be self-supporting or mutually supporting in that way, where you can establish baseline takes from administrative data sets that are collected from surveys or whatever. But then if you have something a little bit better that specifically in in your local town or local city or organization, you can use that to reflect on sort of the official government answer. And I think the democratization of this is one of the most hopeful parts for me about how this can make some sense of its supporting decision making. I think that the second part of the question about the impact on smaller communities is one of our preoccupying focuses here, is how do we sort of try to address some of these gaps, because as it goes farther and farther and data gets faster and faster and more complex and more dense, we have to provide the supports. I mean, a lot of these towns, smaller areas, a common thing is lack of capacity to even process or utilize existing standard survey-based data. So, I mean, how are they supposed to maintain things? And so this is a key benefit of engaging in these sorts of activities and learning how things go from the bottom up. So then we can lobby and we can plan appropriately to help address these things. Yeah.
Okay, so probably our last one here is not a question, but something just worth noting, which is a good point. Some of the Stats Canada levels are not normalized across the country. They are defined differently in each province. So if when using data across provinces, you have to be careful working with the stats. This is definitely true. And actually this segues perfectly into just introducing our next session in this Data to Decisions series. It's going to be on data quality and checking for issues exactly like this, and how different geographies and different data sets are defined from province to province and place to place. So that is definitely something worth noting. And on that note, we are coming up to the end of our time here now. So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending, and thank you for these really great questions. And thank you, Jamie, for your answers. And thanks to the Harris Center team for organizing this. Our next session, which I just mentioned, is going to be focused on data quality. It's coming up in December. So keep an eye out for that next session, and hopefully you'll join us again for that one. So thank you so much for joining in today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.